What's up guys, welcome back. Today we're gonna be working on the fuel system on this thing. So I got a whole box of fittings and parts and pieces for this thing, all -6. I got a new selector valve for the dual tanks. I'm gonna be running the Corvette style fuel pressure regulator and filter. This is a returnless system that I got, so that'll work good to return that extra fuel to the tanks. I did get a new tank switch for the EFI tanks. Supposedly that needs to be utilized. A lot of this stuff I got from Hot Rod Fuel Hose, but they shorted me in a bunch of stuff. So I'm kind of piecing together stuff locally. I did get the 6AN fuel line. I did start running that up. I got one fitting put on and ran up to the fuel rail already. So that's where that comes in. I am gonna have to tie this probably to the top of the bell housing back here, and then along the frame all the way back to that regulator. But I'm gonna get going on this. I'll probably be working on some other stuff at the same time. Just kind of working on it here and there and trying to get some things done in my free time. So let's go. Alright guys, here's where I'm at. I got that fuel regulator, that Corvette style one, mounted on the frame rail. I just took out one of the little bolts that hold these clamps for the brake lines and the old fuel lines and utilized one of those holes that's already there. I ran that fuel line from there up to the fuel rail. Yeah, I'm gonna get some little clamps and tie this to the frame, make it look nice. I also need to pull this all back off after and make sure the line's all cleaned out before I put some fresh fuel through it. I got these adapter fittings from Hot Rod Fuel Hose to adapt the AN line to this regulator. I still need to go through and tighten all these up for good, but I'm just mocking this up. And then I got that new switching valve installed up here. Now to adapt this AN line to that, I've got these little fittings, these AN fittings to barb, and I'll have to put a female fitting on the fuel line I'm using, and then just use some short chunks of this rubber stuff between the return and the feed on this switch and the barb on this. So I'll just have some short sections of fuel hose right between there to adapt it to that, and then I'll also have to do that out the back side to adapt it to the fuel lines going to the tanks. I'm gonna get a rough measurement, pull this hose off, build a couple of these outside of the truck because it's not that neat laying underneath and trying to do this kind of stuff. So I'm gonna pull this fuel line off, get a couple measurements, and get going. I got those two made up, two identical lengths, and then I just put a couple feet of hose on there. I'll cut these to size once I get up underneath the truck. I did throw some hose clamps on there just for extra assurance. These are barbed and you shouldn't have to do that, but I just wanted to make sure, a little bit of extra insurance on there, keep those things connected. So I'm gonna go back underneath, cut these to length, get these installed on that switching valve. Then I'm kind of at a standstill on the fuel lines because I'm waiting on a couple other barbed fittings for the back side of that switching valve so I can adapt the saddlebag tanks to the AN lines. So I'm gonna go get some measurements, cut these to length, get these installed, and then I might start working on the fuel pumps and the sending units that I've got sitting over on the bench. So that's how it turned out. Got those short little pieces tied in there to the barb fittings and adapted it to the AN fittings right up to that fuel pressure regulator, and then from there up to the fuel rail. So like I mentioned, I do need a couple more barb fittings for the lines that go to both tanks that I'm still waiting on. So I think I'm gonna go get cleaned up for the night, and I'll be back out tomorrow and we'll start working on the fuel pumps and the pickups that go in the tanks. I think I'm gonna paint the tanks as well. They are kind of a primer gray color. I think I'm gonna paint them all black, get them kind of matching everything. So hopefully I can get those painted, get the pickups and the pumps all set up, maybe even get the tanks installed. So I'll see you guys tomorrow.
The next day.
And it's a new day. Today we're gonna still be working on the fuel system. I got sending units, fuel pumps, all that stuff right here that I need to get together. And then I've got 2 new fuel injected tanks out of an 87 square body. I'm gonna scuff them up a little bit, try and get those painted so we can get the sending units in and get them in the truck. Here's where we're at. We got those tanks painted. Both of them came out looking pretty good. This one I got the sending unit, the fuel pump, all the fittings, everything 100% done. Got the new tank brackets on there to hang it on the frame. So this one is 100% ready to go in. I also put the barbed fittings on this fuel line that'll go from the switching valve and convert it to AN lines to go to the tanks. So those are ready to go. Got my other sending unit and everything right there. The only thing I'm still waiting on is one more fitting to go from this tube to the AN line. Supposedly it's shipped, but I'm gonna get these cut, get this sending unit and fuel pump all ready to rock and roll and drop in that tank. Then when that fitting shows up, I can just throw it on and be ready. I'm gonna go as far as I can with this sending unit, get that fuel pump and everything done, try and get these fuel lines on, maybe get that tank hung. So hopefully we can get this thing about wrapped up other than that one fitting. My plan also on these breathers for these sending units, I'm gonna tie them both together and run them to the evap system on the square body because I am in an emissions state and have to have emissions. So I pulled the evap solenoid off the Cadillac, got it installed. I used the Cadillac pipe that goes back and down the firewall and cut that tube underneath. So I'll have to adapt that tube to kind of a T underneath and tie it to both of those breathers so the evap is operational. So let's get going. So here's what I got. I'm gonna cut off these tube fittings and then the adapter I got converts that tube fitting to an AN6 line. So you've got to pull this adapter thing off, slide this fitting on, and then it's got a little ferrule that slides over the pipe, tighten that down, crushes it on there, makes a nice tight seal, and lets you adapt it to the AN style fittings. I'm gonna cut that off with this little, just a little tubing cutter, cheap little tubing cutter you can get at any auto parts store or whatever. One thing on the first one I did have to do was kind of loosen up these clamps that are on top and bend these pipes up a little bit so I can get that tubing cutter on there. But I'm gonna get these cut off, both of them, before I do anything with the fuel pump. I don't want any little metal shavings going down the line, dropping into that fuel pump or whatever. So I'm gonna cut them off first, deburr them, and then I'll move on to that fuel pump. got that one ready. The only thing I need to do is put that other fitting on here when it shows up, and this thing's ready to go. I'm also waiting on a wiring harness to wire these up to the LS, so hopefully that'll be coming soon. But I'm just gonna throw this one back in the box, wait for that other fitting to come, and then I can throw that in the tank. One thing I did notice, this is for the driver's side. These hose barbs that were on this pickup are a lot shorter than the other ones. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So on this passenger side pickup, you can see how long these things are. I cut off probably another 1.5 to 2 inches of that. And then you can see how short these ones are. It barely sticks out. I had to kind of modify this little hold down clamp that's on there to get it to lay flat. I'm not sure why the driver's side is a little bit different, but I only cut off maybe 3/8 to 1/2 of an inch of this just to get that little barb off of there. But as soon as that other fitting shows up, I'll get that thrown on and get this thing thrown in the tank. So now I think I'm gonna clean up some of this mess, get this tank that I have completed hung on the frame, get it landed up there. That way I can measure fuel lines, get those installed, and then make the braided lines that go from those to this pickup. And one thing I love is laying on my back trying to do this stuff on the concrete. So let's just jump right into it. Never mind, I'm running to the hardware store. I got this thing held up there where it goes in these holes right here. And the original brackets, these are replacements that I got from LMC. The original brackets had nuts welded on the backside for the bolt to go through the frame and screw right into that bracket. But there's no nuts on the back side of these. So I gotta run to the hardware store, find some nuts that'll fit these so that I can get these all installed. All right, we got that tank mounted up, got it on there. One thing I ran into, like I mentioned, is that these new aftermarket brackets don't have nuts on the backside, so I went and got those nuts to put them on. It was fine back here, but the front bracket, there's no way for me to get my arm up in there to put those nuts on. So I pulled it off, pulled it all back apart, took those nuts and welded them on so that I could just run the bolt in from the backside. But we got this thing all mounted up. Another thing, this insulation stuff from LMC is kind of chintzy, doesn't really want to stay put, but it's on there. So I did get my little fuel lines snipped to length. The two on the right are for the passenger side, the two on the left are for the driver's side. I'm going to get those put on that little switching valve under there for the dual tanks, and then from there I'll make the AN lines go into the pickups. So with those fuel hoses, I got a 45-degree fitting and a 90-degree fitting for each side, thinking that would be perfect. But I think I'm gonna do two 45s on this side because I don't know if you'll be able to see up in there. They shoot right past this body mount is where the switching valve is. So I think two 45s would put that on a perfect angle. And then I can utilize those two 90s on the other side, get them turned because they'll have more room to sweep back across this way. So I think that's what I'm gonna do is use the two 45s. These little stubby pieces that I cut, I was hoping I could get them long enough coming up here that I'd have access to those fittings if I ever needed to unhook it or whatever. But to have them long enough to get access, this AN hose will only be 2 inches long, which isn't gonna cut it. I want the majority of it being this AN hose. So I cut them a little shorter. So to undo that side of the fuel line in the future, if I ever have to, I'll probably have to pull that switching valve out to do that, unhook it off the tank and then pull that out to replace the line or something like that. But that's no big deal. So I'm gonna pull that switching valve off, get these little stubby hoses put on there for good, tighten down, so I can start making my AN lines. I may have to in the future pull this tank back off because, sneak peek, I started working on the cab corner on this. This thing was all rusted out. As you can see, it was pretty rusty in there. So I pulled that off the other day thinking that would be a quick project to do, get that replaced. But I found some more rust in here, so I'm gonna have to replace this rocker too. So I'm waiting for one of those to come. But I may have to get that tank out of the way if I need more access back in here. I think I might wait to put that passenger side tank on too, because I got to do that side as well. And it'd be a lot easier to get that stuff done with those tanks out of the way. But that's kind of part of a project like this, mocking stuff up, installing it, taking it off 10 times if you have to, just to get it right. But I'm gonna get that switching valve out and get those stubby hoses put on so I can finish making these fuel lines. Okay guys, we made some pretty decent progress today. I'll show you what we got done. Like I mentioned before, we got that fuel line going from the rail that goes right over the bell housing, under the truck, and into that fuel pressure regulator and filter. And then we got the two lines, the feed and the return, coming back to the switching valve. This is the fuel injected switching valve, like I mentioned. So we got it coming back to there. I got fuel lines coming off of that, going to the right-hand tank, and then two fuel lines coming off of that, coming over to the driver's side, going to the left-hand tank. We got this passenger side tank in, all plumbed up. I got those lines made, the feed and the return line made. This vent line is gonna drop down underneath and follow those fuel lines over to the driver's side, tie into that vent, and then tie into the evap system. So everything's kosher with the emissions. Then over here on the driver's side, I just stubbed these lines over, cut them a little long, so I had enough. When that other fitting shows up, I'll be able to throw it on that sending unit and get that dropped in the tank, get that tank hung, and then tie these fuel lines and that breather line into that sending unit. The only thing I got left to do, other than that stuff I just mentioned, is pull these lines back off, spray them out, clean them out, make sure they're 100% clean, and then do a final tightening on all of them, make sure they're all tight and clean. And I'm also waiting on a wiring harness that I purchased that's supposed to be for these square body trucks with dual tank setup. It's all wired up, has the relays and everything. So I'm waiting for that still. Hopefully it shows up here in the next little bit so I can wrap up the fuel project on this thing. Once I get that fuel and stuff wrapped up, I'm gonna work on the power steering. I got the kind of factory line off that Cadillac plugged in there. Got the small little fitting off the square body. So I just gotta get this stuff all buttoned up so the power steering's done. And then we're working on cooling system. I appreciate you guys following along. If you got any questions, drop them in the comments. As always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that thumbs up button, and we'll see you guys next time.